Good evening. I'm Kosala Kodikara. I'm a senior data engineer at RMIT, and I'm also a committee member of SPUR. And today we have a special guest today, Mr. Lakshman Silva, who's a banking professional with over 35 years of experience in Sri Lanka. And he's actually currently serving as Lanka Pay chairman, and previous to that he was the CEO of DFCC. So today is a special day. He's come for a short holiday, and he gave us the opportunity to have a bit of a discussion of the current Sri Lankan economic situation, and as well as talk about the future prospects in Sri Lanka, especially in how we all can in Australia as professionals get involved with economic activity in Sri Lanka, So we have to be very positive. Sri Lanka has many issues, undoubtedly, but we have to also look at the positive side and look at how we can get involved with economic activity in Sri Lanka to make Sri Lanka a better place, which we can always make happen. So without ado, Mr. Lakshman Silva, if you can elaborate, go into detail about what the current situation is in a high level, and perhaps how we as Sri Lankans in living abroad as professionals, can contribute to the development of Sri Lanka.
Yeah. Good evening, Kosala. Thank you for inviting me for this activity, this discussion. I'm very happy that for the second time I am meeting at Vishvavahini for a discussion of this nature. Especially, I think all overseas expatriates, people who have migrated from Sri Lanka, have been always looking at Sri Lankan's progress. And we had actually undergone a terrible period of time in the history of 75 years in Sri Lanka. We had not had any situations of this nature. So, as everybody knows that, our economic downturn started from the COVID period. After the COVID, there was an economic downturn. Economic activities got slowed down. Our remittances to Sri Lanka came down drastically. Tourism got impacted. And as a result of all these downturns, Sri Lankan economy had a serious problem. Sri Lanka economy ran with our reserves for a period of about 2 to 3 years. Reserve position got deteriorated, and we ended up with the Aragalaya, famous Aragalaya in Sri Lanka, where the people elected president was actually he had to give up his position, and an interim president was elected for a period of time. So now 2 years have finished of that period also, and we are now heading towards a presidential election in September 21st. And I believe during the last 2 years, there have been some stabilization to the economy, and we see a progress that's happening in Sri Lanka in all terms. And confidence level had gone up in Sri Lanka. Foreign expatriates, Sri Lankans who are living abroad, have been started sending remittances to Sri Lanka gradually. It had improved a lot. Tourism had picked up, and according to the central bank latest statistics, we have achieved the pre-COVID levels of tourism, more than a growth, but somewhat an acceptable level. Remittances are at satisfactory level. So the last 2 quarters, all the experts viewed Sri Lankan's growth to be a negative one, but the positive side is that we are having a positive growth. GDP growth, and central bank governor and the experts in economic activities are expecting Sri Lanka to have at least 2% GDP growth in the next 2 quarters, and they are expecting 2025 at least to have 3 to 4% of GDP growth. That's not a satisfactory level, but I think most importantly what we can see is that we have actually now out of the main issue. But yet we have some more challenges to face. As you know, we have about $100 billion US dollars of liabilities to be settled in terms of domestic debt, international sovereign bonds, And in addition to that, multilateral and bilateral loans. Domestic debt have been restructured to a great extent. Those indications have been already given to the lenders. Bilateral and multilateral, anyway, the bilateral loans have been paid by the country. Interest have been serviced, and those have not been actually, we have not rescheduled. But the multilateral loans are to be rescheduled. Paris Club had agreed, India had agreed, China had agreed. We are yet to see the terms and conditions of those facilities. ISBs also, in principle, they have agreed to reschedule the payments, and terms are to be known to us. If I tell in short, all the formalities with regard to the debt restructuring has happened. Until the announcements are made, we are yet to know what the situations are going to be. But for the moment, country's economic situation seems stable, and that is without servicing the debts. But with the reschedulement that is happening, we expect a better economic outlook in 2025. And based on the presidential election that is to be held on the 21st of September, I believe the situation can become more improved, and also the confidence level of the investors is expected to increase.
Right. So, Mr. Lakshman, can you, I know, so that's the macroeconomic situation, of this. See, the issue always comes down to is when people talk about GDP improvements, they say the growth is happening, but day to day we see a level of certain frustrations of people, people who are living as expats as well as people who are living on the ground, So the expectations are always tend to be a little misaligned in terms of, okay, things are positively happening, but they see things quite negatively, which I think is a bit unfair as well, because I feel like perhaps you can elaborate, rather than we have a tendency to be a little negative as a nation, to be honest. That's something I noticed. We're not never, even things are, if the sun is shining, we will say, oh, it might rain, and kind of scenario. Glass is always half full for Sri Lankans living abroad and living in Sri Lanka scenario. So they always tend to look at the problems. So how can we look at it in different aspect and say, individually, rather than depending on just two income sources that I see, that is tourism, as a main income source, as a second one is remittances. We need to diversify that, I believe, and get more people involved in building actual industries, get involved in building businesses, entrepreneurship, rather than simply following a professional path. How do we build a business? How do we get involved? How do we get involved in a business that's starting in Sri Lanka? Those are our contributions. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you're correct. Sri Lanka is not a 100% export-oriented country. I think a lot to do into the export areas, and I think we had to overcome these traditional exports of coconut, tea, rubber business, and we had to come into more value-added products to be introduced, value addition processes to be introduced to Sri Lanka. I think we saw some progress in that regard prior to COVID, but unfortunately with the COVID and the economic downturn, nothing had got materialized. I think we had to restart the whole processes. Now, as you correctly mentioned, if we to develop the export market, export-oriented industries, then there should be consistent policies from the Sri Lankan government itself. I think in the last 4 years, it's not a good benchmark for us to look at, because as we know, 2-year period of Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa's, there were certain progresses that was made, but unfortunately with this unfortunate incident that happened July 2023, thereafter the things have got again changed, and the present president have also introduced certain incentive schemes and various things to improve the export income in Sri Lanka. It has to be, if you really look at certain indexes, to set up businesses in Sri Lanka is not very attractive. Actually, we are very, very down in that level. From a startup business to a growth level, there should be all the processes should be very convenient for the industrialist. So that is not in acceptable level in Sri Lanka. Sri Lankan governments had been having one-stop shop decision where they were trying to, the good old days we had, still we have the BOI, but BOI only gets involved in the approvals, but there should be an entity, institution which looks after the process from beginning to an end. That is how the industrialists can be attracted to Sri Lanka. Then when it comes to the exchange control regulations and various other the aspects, central bank has to look at as to how these things can be very easy people to invest, and also they are investing with the expectation of the returns to be taken away. If it is a foreign investor, if it is a Sri Lankan investor, then they should be encouraged. The third factor that is important is the consistent tax policies in the country. And fortunate or unfortunate, there had been situations where the tax policies have not been very consistent. When people invest funds with an intention of generating satisfactory revenue, if they are being taxed heavily, I think the situation is not in favor of the industrialist. Then of course people get discouraged. So now the challenge is the Sri Lankan economy, basically as per the IMF program, they are looking at the tax revenue to be increased at least to get it to 12% of GDP. Currently we are at a lower level. So in that respect, certain tax policies have been introduced in Sri Lanka. Tax rates have been increased. But I think holistically the authorities need to look at as to how the tax base can be broadened. Give certain concessions to the startups at least, especially SME sector, and also provide incentives for the export-oriented industries, because we are starting from the rock bottom again, and we have to deviate from the traditional exports of maybe gem jewelry, exports of coconut and tea rubber. There are many other things. Cinnamon is an area there where we have a good market outside Sri Lanka. So agricultural sector is where that you have to promote our industries, and they are also not raw agriculture. It is a value addition process that we have to actually get into, and more of industrial policies have to be relooked at by the government of Sri Lanka. As you correctly mentioned, we cannot depend on all the time with the remittances coming from overseas. Now we are facing a situation where Middle East, there's a turbulent situation. We don't know where this political situation will end up in the Middle East. If that happens, naturally about 600,000 Sri Lankans who are working in Middle Eastern areas, Lebanon, Israel and various other countries, if that get impacted, then the remittances get slowed down again. So that is something that we have to avoid. And how can we avoid that? By diversifying our range of income sources. Entrepreneurship in Sri Lanka, because our literacy level of people is very high, and there is a set of educated boys and girls in Sri Lanka, young generation, who wants to start enterprises, who wants to start industries, who wants to start businesses, and they have to be encouraged. So I believe for that purpose, while the government sector does various policy changes, introduce new policies to incentivize these people, I think the financial sector also has a bigger responsibility of making, there's a conception among the people that the financial sector is risk averse and they only lend people with security, collateral, that kind of thing. I think being in the banking sector, I must confess that this situation had to get changed. I think the banks also need to look at differently and allocate certain fundings for these startup projects, entrepreneurs, because we can't find venture capital in Sri Lanka. Venture capitalists are not there. Therefore, at least these SME sectors had to be given some hand, and we have to bring up the industry. And also the tourism sector also, I think we are operating the tourism sector in a more traditional way. Current tourists who are coming to Sri Lanka are different to who came to Sri Lanka about 10 years ago. So they are looking at various activities that they like to enjoy. Those days when we were very young, we used to hear that the tourists come to Sri Lanka only to be in the beachfront, but that is not what. So they are looking at experiences that they can have during the holiday period of that they have. They travel a lot. So I think more of socialized social activities have to be increased. People of the country have to be educated how to treat these tourists. More regulatory measures has to be brought in and allow the tourism industry also to diversify. I know even in Colombo, sometimes you find that it's a dead city in the night, and tourists who are coming want more activities. And when they travel, the public transport system in Sri Lanka is very weak, and especially there is a lot of attraction when you travel in train, but then the train systems are not very highly geared to accommodate this kind of tourists. So I think all in all, we need to look at a complete divestment, traditional way of thinking, doing new things to create some avenues, and self-employment opportunities have to be created. More people. And when it comes to music and other entertainment activities, we need to bring up. I think we have talent in Sri Lanka. Fortunately, those are still remaining. During the period of last 2-3 years, we have seen a large number of talented people had left the country, or maybe for a temporary period of time. So if we convert all this into a positive mindset, I think the people will return back to the country, and they have not gone for the lifetime of their life. But I think end of the day, what we have to do is to get this talent back again to Sri Lanka. Some attraction should be created, as you mentioned. Expatriates have to be brought in. Some investment opportunities have to be given. I am not saying 100% tax incentives, but there should be a stable, consistent tax policies introduced. So any industrialists who come to Sri Lanka, any entrepreneur who comes to Sri Lanka, Sri Lankan entrepreneurs, when they do the industrial projections for 4-5 years, they know that the tax policies won't change and their pricing, competitiveness can get increased. So I think these are the things that we can do. In addition to that, learning from other countries, productivity improvement in Sri Lanka is a great improvement requirement. I think the government service, it's a known fact the government service is overburdened, and recruitments, and there is a policy by the present president of privatizing certain SOEs, which is an important thing, because SOEs are making losses and it's a great burden for the rest of the country. So some of the SOEs which are very essential has to be restructured, and those organizations should be made independent and to make a profit-making entities which will get the burden out of the people out of the way, and the loss-making entities to become profitable, and they also should contribute to the country's economy. So these are actually wider policies, and everybody's thinking is that Sri Lanka economic activities should be run by the professionals, and the political involvement to a great extent should be reduced. I think the politicians in Sri Lanka should understand, they should learn a lesson from the developed countries and developing other countries, where their involvement economic activities are less, and they are more policy setters, and they don't get involved in the policy economic activities of the country. That is a more important thing, I think. So these are the fundamental prospects that we have to develop if the confidence level, as you mentioned, to improve. And if you do that, then we can get into the correct track for a growth.
Yeah, absolutely. Lakshman, that's absolutely correct, because policy, see, this is always a sticking point. See, someone starts a business, things are going well, and then suddenly some policy changes and the whole thing collapses. So this is a massive mental suffering. They end in despair and they simply give up. And I have heard so many stories. People positively come to Sri Lanka, they start a small cake shop or some flower shop, or these are not big things they start, expats start, they have certain ideas that they execute in Australia, for example. And my personal experience, I know one lady who went from Australia, so she started her own cookie business there in Sri Lanka in a small way. But with this changing economic climate, it is simply collapsed, that particular business, and once that story gets out, when she shares her experience with other people similar, everyone gets discouraged, and then that's it.
Yeah.
So it's very important to make sure you have good branding for your own policies. This is something very surprising. It's something now, you talk about developed countries, and taking example of it. See, our people, I feel they are only trying to copy laws. You can't improve a country through laws. I believe this is where we go wrong all the time here. Word to word, we can't copy the Australian constitution and implement it in Sri Lanka and say, that's going to develop the country. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So we have to make sure it's something more than that happens here. It's all about that the journey is complete. If someone comes and invests in Sri Lanka, we have to make sure they are a success, because they themselves become brand ambassadors for their success.
Absolutely.
When everyone looks at it and says, oh my God, this person became a success, we went to Sri Lanka and did this, I need to do that too. So, you create a whole crowd behind that. Then everyone starts going there. So this is what needs to happen here. So we cannot do that simply through laws. So business people, I think, also need to understand we need to create that climate of success.
Yeah.
So they also try, I feel like, to be fair, I'm not trying to defend politicians here. Business people in Sri Lanka also contribute to this issue by when they see people like us coming there and doing something, they try to crush us, and they don't see the bigger issue. Okay, guy, look what happens if you crush this guy who came from Australia and starts a business. The message that gets sent back.
Yeah.
Let's look at the bigger picture here. Why do they always want to go for short-term gains? Let this guy grow. Let him become big. From that, I will also benefit. Then look at that bigger picture here.
But I think the situation in Sri Lanka is slightly very difficult to, as you correctly mentioned, we cannot emulate what is being done overseas.
Yeah.
When you really look at, we have a 21 million population roughly, and working class is about 60-70%. And it's only 40% who are into the business, and we have also a large number who are under a certain income levels. So I think social benefits are very, very limited. So when you really look at the market size of Sri Lanka is also a concern. Even an industrialist to come and do something in Sri Lanka, you need a bigger market. So I think that in that respect, it is important. As present government had done, we need to have some bilateral trade agreements, which are very important.
Yeah.
We have a neighbor which is a very big country, India. We have actually Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, close by, and Maldives. Now these countries can be served from Sri Lanka. So our markets has to be expanded, and traditionally what we have been, our entrepreneurs have been thinking is only to cater to the Sri Lankan market. So obviously when there is some issue with the Sri Lankan economy or the people in the country, the industries has to face these problems. So if they have a overview with regard to their operations, getting into the overseas markets, if they do the quality cost very well, manage it well, and if they have the ability to get into the exports market. So as you asked previously, non-traditional exports are a bigger thing. Now I know some of the entrepreneurs in Sri Lanka into the food industry. They are very successful in India, in Bangladesh, and in countries like that, in Maldives. And some of the export-oriented people do exports into these countries, and they are doing well, and they do value additions. So I think Sri Lankan entrepreneurs should not narrowly think about the Sri Lankan economy, because our markets are small, therefore they have to look at overseas. So for that purpose, government should come out with more and more bilateral trade agreements. There was a natural tendency to resist these agreements in the past, but I think that's now over. People have accepted there is an agreement that is with India. Recently, I think President signed an agreement with Thailand, and Indonesia is on the horizon. If those agreements are finalized, I think the export business and industrialist opportunities to bigger markets in the world eyes opening out. I think that's a very good sign. And it's another, Middle Eastern countries is another good market that we have to look at. I think, so any entrepreneur who comes into Sri Lanka should not look at only Sri Lanka market. So I fully agree with you that thinking has to change, and also our policies also had to get changed. Allow people to do such businesses and encourage them to do more export-oriented business. I think that's the way to go forward.
Yeah. Exactly, Mr. Lakshman. So this is a very good topic you picked here. It's a very, very critical one. That is in fact, that's the awesome line of thinking there. That is, when we look at Sri Lanka, we are just looking at our population. Now we are, this is the natural advantage Sri Lanka has because of the location. We are connected to a bigger market. That is India. It is India, number one India, and then we have the Southeast Asia on our right hand side. If you look at the globe, to the top we have this massive, supermassive market of 1 billion people. But again, I feel it comes down to our own attitudes toward India. I think this is where the problem is. That is, we look at it a little bit have an antagonistic relationship with India. We don't have the correct friendly relationship with them, even people-wise. We tend to look at it a little bit negatively. So this is, I feel, is a bit of a challenge for us attitude-wise that we need to overcome. We're always looking at the Western side, trying to export things to West. Why not export things to India, as you correctly said? Why not to Malaysia, to the Middle East? This is a massive market and a massive opportunity. I think the key thing is also holding back here is also the language barrier. So we have a lot of emphasis on learning English, but whereas the emphasis on learning Hindi, whereas the emphasis on learning Arabic, to communicate with this market. Just think about it. If you just sell one piece of candy to India, 10% of those people buy it. That's enough.
Yeah.
100 million.
Absolutely.
You sell 100 million items there,
Yeah.
If you keep a 10 cents profit margin, man, you made $10 million, in one shot.
Correct.
Our guys don't understand the gold mine they're living on. This is what shocks me. Sri Lanka is a naturally rich country. To be honest, I think one of the richest countries on earth.
Yeah.
Because potential-wise. But to reach the potential, it's all about thinking outside that box, freeing yourself from legacies, Our guys are just too tied to the past and assumes too much to the future.
Yeah.
Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's true. Actually, I mean, for that, actually, Sri Lankan politicians are also to be responsible, because I think in general public, the ability to negotiate trade terms, trade agreements are very limited. So I think if you really look at India has a very good civil service, and their policies are very consistent, and when they really negotiate trade or any other terms, they are very strong. We are actually from a weak position only negotiating these kind of terms. So obviously there are situations, times, and where generally stronger nations are when they negotiate with weaker countries, we had to give into those things. But I think now the situation have got changed. We have a stronger relationship with India. India also should understand the potential of Sri Lanka. And when we negotiate with Indian terms, bilateral terms, we have to improve. And as you mentioned, I think Thailand, for an example, I think we have done that finalization of trade agreements. Depending on the terms that they have negotiated, I think we have a strong position. So obviously, as you mentioned, that our literacy is very high. English speaking numbers are very high, but I think the tendency to learn other languages other than Chinese, most probably, is very limited. I think that is because of the opportunities that are available outside. Because although Indian people come and work in Sri Lanka, it's very, very limited opportunity that you get Sri Lankans to go and work in India. If at all, it is only the IT professions or people who are into various other service sectors are going to India. So I think this expansion is very important, that the mind block that people has about, or negative impression they have about India has to be changed, because they have to accept that the Indian markets are bigger, much bigger, and we have to serve those countries, and if we serve it, we will have benefits. I think, so all in all, I fully agree, and I think that has to start from the top. 21st of September, if the election outcomes, depending on the election outcome, I think the policy setters should take a cue of the past learnings and set up the policies in such a way. Because I think when you really look at last year, Aragale, what they really want was a change to the system. And we have to accept the fact that there is a dire need and a demand from the public for a change to the system. So I think whoever who comes into power should set clear policies into the country and have consistent policies going forward.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think we have come to the end of the discussion. Thank you, Mr. Lakshman, for participating. Thank you for your very valuable time. And I hope to see you again next year as well, and have another fruitful discussion. And hopefully next year we can actually talk about, more positive things, more positive things happening, what we discussed here today, people getting more involved. So looking forward to an amazing future ahead, because I believe Sri Lanka does have an amazing future, and it's up to us to realize it.
Yeah, thank you, Kosala, for giving me this opportunity. And I invite all Australian, where the Sri Lankans who are living in Australia, to look at Sri Lanka very positively and join hands with in the growth process on Sri Lanka. Thank you very much. Have a good night.
All right. Thank you. Good night.